The boot hit her head with a sound that didn't match the heat of the day. It was sharp, fast, and final. Staff Sergeant Elena Cruz dropped to the dirt like a sack of gear, the side of her face smearing across packed clay baked by the Texas sun. 53 recruits stood motionless, rifles gripped, mouths parted, eyes wide. No one moved. No one breathed. The air hung thick. It was barely 9 in the morning, but the heat had already turned cruel. The ground shimmered amid sweat, dripped off brows and soaked into uniforms. Somewhere in the distance, a Black Hawk moved low across the sky. But down here, on this stretch of Fort Dempsey's training field, everything had stopped. Elena didn't cry out. She didn't even speak. Blood slid down her temple in slow, deliberate lines. Her hand, instinctive and practiced, moved to the side of her head. She blinked hard, grounding herself, forcing her body to respond through the pain. Dust clung to her skin, her left knee bent. She pushed herself upright, jaw clenched. Her breathing was shallow but steady. The recruits didn't know where to look. Some stared at the man who kicked her. Others stared at Elena. No one said a word. One recruit's hand began to tremble on the grip of his M4. Another swallowed hard. They'd all seen discipline before. They'd been shouted at, pushed past exhaustion, corrected until they could barely think. But this was something else. This wasn't training. It was too personal, too violent, too quiet. The man responsible stood just beyond her reach. His stance didn't shift. His face didn't flinch. It was as if nothing unusual had happened, as if what he'd done was just another step in the drill. He stared straight ahead, chest rising with steady rhythm, waiting to see if she would get up or stay down. She got up, not fast, not dramatically, but with purpose. Legs steady, shoulders square, blood still dripping, sweat still pooling behind her neck. She locked eyes with him. There was no rage in her stare, only clarity. She wasn't asking for anything. Not help, not pity, not permission. The field stayed frozen. The heat pressed harder. And somewhere, far off, a clock ticked toward 2:47 p.m. Staff Sergeant Elena Cruz had spent the better part of her adult life on the sharp edge of conflict. She wasn't loud about it. She didn't brag, didn't lead with her resume. But her record spoke clearly enough for those who knew how to read it. 3 combat deployments. Iraq first, then Afghanistan, and most recently, Syria. Over 9 years spent moving between forward operating bases and aid stations, working out of dusty med tents, cramped armored vehicles, and half-collapsed buildings. She'd stopped counting how many lives she'd pulled back from the brink. Not because they didn't matter, but because counting felt too close to keeping score. And war wasn't a game. She'd done field surgeries under blackout conditions, guided only by the dim red glow of a filtered headlamp. She'd clamped arteries while mortars dropped less than 100 meters away. She'd learned to read the terrain like a map of risk, learned to move fast, stay low, and make every second count. Her combat medical badge hadn't been handed to her. It had been earned with blood, heat, and sleepless nights. Along the way, 11 official commendations followed, each tucked into her file, each one a silent witness to her steadiness under fire. When her time overseas finally ended, the Army didn't let her go far. They offered her a position at Fort Dempsey in Texas, a sprawling installation known for its rigorous ground combat training program. Elena had accepted the assignment, not because she was ready to slow down, but because she saw value in shaping soldiers before they reached the front lines. She believed in preparation. She believed in standards. Most of all, she believed in teaching people how to survive. Her role was clear: senior instructor, medical response and tactical field care. She would guide recruits through combat casualty drills, heat injury protocol, and the basics of field triage. But as soon as she arrived, it was clear she wasn't just stepping into a job. She was stepping into a culture, one built on hardline discipline, thick-necked authority, and a sharp resistance to anything that challenged the status quo. To some instructors, she was impressive. To others, she was a threat. Not because she was disruptive, but because she didn't play into the old rhythm. She didn't yell unless it mattered. She didn't tolerate shortcuts. And she didn't tolerate performative toughness, especially when it endangered people's lives. That rubbed some of the senior cadre the wrong way. To them, toughness was loud. It barked orders, barked louder when challenged, and never apologized. Elena's toughness was quieter. It showed up when things got real. When a recruit hit the ground with heat stroke or a training accident turned serious, that's when she stepped in. Not with panic, not with pride, just with precision and calm. She knew her presence made waves. She could feel it in the looks exchanged during briefings, in the way certain instructors lowered their voices when she entered a room. But she didn't flinch. She wasn't here to win popularity. She was here to uphold the oath she took at 22. The same one that had carried her through every combat zone, and now into this one. A different battlefield, but a fight all the same. By 7:45 a.m., the heat had already swallowed the yard. Dust curled off the ground in waves. The sun wasn't just hot. It pressed down with weight, like someone laying a loaded pack across your shoulders and telling you to move faster. No breeze, no shade, just dry air, scraping across skin like sandpaper. Bayonet drills had started before sunrise, but the real work began once the temperature passed 98. Recruits lined up in 2 staggered formations, rifles fixed with rubber-tipped blades. Their uniforms were soaked. Boots stomped the ground in rhythm as they drove bayonets into weighted sandbags stacked on wooden poles. Each thrust came with a guttural yell, more habit than meaning. Some looked like they were trying to prove something. Others looked like they were just trying to stay upright. Elena Cruz moved in the 3rd row. Her form was different. She didn't waste energy. Her grip was firm but relaxed. Every movement was deliberate. A step forward. Blade angled low. A sharp thrust into the center mass of the target. Quick reset. No flailing. No shouting. Just clean, economical motion. A few recruits nearby noticed. One adjusted his stance to match hers. Another mirrored the way she shifted her weight. None of it was spoken. It didn't have to be. Not far off, Sergeant First Class Rick Dalton watched. He stood under a canopy meant for instructors, arms crossed, jaw set, 22 years in, infantry to the bone, barrel-chested, shaved head, voice like a worn-out muffler. He ran his range the old way, but can't. Break them down, build them up, or don't bother building them at all. Elena was a problem he hadn't asked for. Her calm made him uneasy. The way she didn't yell, the way recruits seemed to respond without being barked at. She didn't challenge him outright, but her presence shifted the balance, and he hated it. He didn't confront her directly. Not yet. Instead, it came in the form of thinly veiled jabs. Comments dropped in earshot of others. Looks exchanged behind mirrored sunglasses. Remarks like, "Not bad for a medic," or "We don't need nurses leading rifle drills." Orders aimed at her section delivered with just enough edge to make it personal. Elena didn't respond. She adjusted formation spacing, corrected one recruit's foot placement, nodded approval when another improved his strike pattern. Her silence wasn't passive. It was chosen. It was armor. She knew what this was. She'd seen it overseas. Men threatened by competence they didn't control. It always looked the same. Quiet resentment that grew teeth over time. The field pulsed with heat and friction. Every swing of a bayonet kicked more dust into the air. Sweat stung eyes. Breathing turned shallow. Recruits powered through, but their attention was shifting, not to the loudest voice on the field, to the one who moved with clarity, the one who led without needing to raise her voice, the one they'd trust when things got real. Something was changing. Not loud, not sudden, but real. And Rick Dalton could feel it tightening around him. The drill yard was on fire, not from combat, from heat, the kind that sinks through the soles of your boots and curls behind your eyes. It was 9:20 a.m., and the sun had already turned the ground into a slow-cooking griddle. Private Jalen Cooper stumbled during his fourth strike. His rifle wavered. His knees dipped. His face had gone from flushed to pale in the span of a few seconds. Elena saw it immediately. The uneven gait, the way his shoulders sagged, the glassy look starting to settle in his eyes. She stepped forward without hesitation. One hand gripped his shoulder. The other pressed gently to his neck, counting beats. His pulse was too fast. His skin felt clammy. She turned her head just enough to call out over her shoulder, low but firm, as she guided him out of the line. Her words were clipped, focused. Breathe slow. Through your nose. You're overheating. Let's get you cooled down. Then came the movement. Fast, heavy. A boot struck the side of her head, hard. Her vision fractured into light and noise. For a second, there was only ringing. Her knees buckled. The ground slammed up into her, rough and hot. She tasted blood, not imagined. Real, flowing. Her fingers touched her temple and came back wet. Silence dropped over the yard like a curtain. 53 recruits stopped mid-motion. Bayonets hovered. Mouths hung open. Time split down the center. Elena didn't speak. She didn't cry out. She pushed herself up slowly, hand bracing against the dirt. Her legs shook once, then held. Her face was streaked red. The blood ran along her jawline. She didn't wipe it away. She turned, calmly, deliberately, and looked Rick Dalton in the eye. He stood tall, breath fast, hands still clenched, waiting for her to break. She didn't. She squared her shoulders, head high, voice low and steady. I'm fine. It wasn't for him. It was for them. The recruits, the ones frozen in place, watching everything. She didn't need to prove toughness. She just needed to stay standing. And she did. With blood on her face and fire behind her eyes. Lieutenant Alex Monroe had seen a lot in his 4 years at Fort Dempsey, but nothing like this. He stood near the edge of the training field, just past the bayonet course, eyes locked on the blood trailing down Staff Sergeant Elena Cruz's face. She was upright, silent, steady. The recruits hadn't moved. Not one. The only sound was the dry crunch of dust shifting under boots. Monroe keyed his radio, voice low but direct. This is Lieutenant Monroe on Training Field Bravo. I'm reporting an assault on a senior non-commissioned officer. Repeat. Assault on SSG Cruz. Request immediate senior command response. He gave coordinates, time, and witness count. Every word crisp, controlled, the way he'd been trained. Exactly 18 minutes later, the hum of engines broke through the silence. 3 black SUVs turned off the main road and rolled across the field with deliberate weight. Every recruit snapped to attention. Instructors straightened, unsure what they were witnessing. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't normal. Doors opened. Out stepped brass. Lieutenant General Eleanor Gaines led the way. Starched uniform. Silver hair pulled back so tightly it didn't move in the wind. Her presence landed like thunder. 2 other generals followed. One with a tablet already recording. No introductions. No small talk. Just one word from Gaines. Explain. Rick Dalton took half a step forward, already sweating. He gestured vaguely toward the field. Said something about testing mental toughness. Combat stress preparation. Instinctive reaction. Gaines raised one hand, palm out, without looking at him. Enough. Her voice was cool, even terrifying in its calm. Discipline is not violence wrapped in the language of readiness. It is not rage disguised as training. It comes from earned respect, from consistency, from structure. What happened here is not training. It is misconduct. Dalton's mouth stayed open, but no sound came out. Around them, the recruits remained frozen, but something had shifted. Their eyes tracked every move. Some looked relieved, some still stunned, but the message was clear. This would not be buried. Gaines turned to Monroe. "Lieutenant, your report." From the top, he delivered it cleanly. Time of incident, actions taken, statement of what he saw, the kick, the collapse, the silence that followed, the failure of the other instructors to intervene. When he finished, Gaines turned to Cruz. She still hadn't moved, still bleeding, still standing. "You will not be punished for maintaining your duty," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. "You will not face reprisal. That is not a suggestion. It is an order." Then she looked to the instructors. "Training is hereby suspended. All activity on this range ceases until further notice. Staff Sergeant Dalton, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. You will surrender your sidearm and report to holding for formal review under Article 128. Gasps moved like wind through tall grass. Dalton's control had ended. The system had arrived. And for once, it wasn't there to protect the abuser. It was there to tear him down. Staff Sergeant Elena Cruz stood in the center of the field, blood drying along the side of her face, posture squared. The heat hadn't let up, but the air felt different now. Heavier. Still. Everyone was watching. Recruits, instructors, officers. The silence wasn't just about respect, it was about waiting to see what she would do next. Lieutenant General Gaines stood a few feet away, flanked by two other generals and a captain with a clipboard. She gave a small nod, granting permission without saying a word. Elena spoke plainly. No emotion, no commentary, just facts. At approximately 9:25 a.m., she had observed signs of heat exhaustion in Private Jalen Cooper, described the physical indicators: pale skin, slowed coordination, rapid breathing. She approached him, placed her left hand on his shoulder, right hand at his neck to check pulse. Pulse was elevated. She began to remove him from formation per protocol to initiate cooling steps. Then, without warning, she was struck from behind with a boot to the right side of her head. She fell, recovered, remained conscious. No additional aggression followed. No instructors intervened. End of report. The recruits remained stiff. Instructors stared at the ground. Dalton stood nearby, eyes on anything but her. General Gaines watched him the entire time Elena spoke. Her hands were still. Her expression didn't shift once. When Elena finished, Gaines exhaled slowly. The nod she gave was smaller this time, but it carried weight. "Your conduct in this situation was exemplary," she said, "calm under assault, clear in your duty. You upheld medical protocol while under stress. That is professionalism. That is leadership. You will not face any disciplinary action. You will not be retaliated against. That is my guarantee." She turned toward the others. "Effective immediately. All training operations are suspended. No drills, no formations, no contact between instructors and trainees without direct supervision. Sergeant First Class Dalton is relieved of duty pending formal charges under military law." There were no cheers, no movement, just breath held and slowly released. In a place where yelling had always been the loudest sound, today, it was quiet that shattered the ground. And Elena Cruz, by simply standing still and telling the truth, had shifted the weight of an entire system. By the third morning after the incident, the mood on the training field had changed. It was still hot, still relentless. But the tension in the air had thinned. Recruits moved with more purpose. Conversations were quieter, but no longer hushed with fear. Orders were still sharp, still firm. But something else had settled in, something lighter. Elena Cruz stood outside a plywood mock-up used for close-quarters drills. Today's lesson was fire team movement through narrow structures. She watched as Private Lee hesitated at the threshold, rifle up but stance too tight. Her weight was off-center, knees locked. Elena stepped beside her. No need to raise her voice. Just pointed to Lee's foot, then gently tapped the elbow of her firing arm. Widen your stance. Let your heels float just off the ground. Keep the rifle tucked, but don't choke it. Move with control, not fear. Lee adjusted, took a breath, and entered the room with a smoother pivot. Her next pass was better. By the third run, she moved with confidence. No words were exchanged afterward. Just a small nod from Lee, and one from Elena in return. Around them, other recruits had started doing the same, asking questions, helping each other reset, laughing, sometimes, between reps. The yelling had quieted. The edge was still there, but now it felt earned, not wielded like a weapon. Even the instructors were different, more precise, less performative. They walked with purpose, not posture. Elena didn't stand at the center. She didn't need to. She was moving alongside them, steady, quiet, present. And through her presence alone, the field had begun to feel like something new, not soft, not easy, just better. The kind of place where people learned because they were respected, not because they were afraid. At 7:45 p.m., the sun dipped low behind the far fence line, leaving the yard in a soft orange haze. Elena Cruz stood by the window in her quarters, boots off, hands resting on the frame. The air was still warm, but the sharp edge of the day had finally faded. Voices floated up from the barracks nearby. Laughter, quiet conversation, not the forced silence she'd walked into 2 weeks ago. The field below looked different now, not in structure, in energy. It held less fear, more trust. Recruits moved with focus, not panic. Instructors listened more, yelled less. Change didn't come with fanfare. It showed up in the pauses, in how people carried themselves. A knock at the door pulled her from the window. Private Cooper stood there, still in uniform, eyes steady. He didn't say much, just that he remembered, that he knew what could have happened if she hadn't stepped in. He thanked her. She nodded once. That was enough. After he left, she sat on the edge of her bunk and let the silence settle. Real leadership isn't always loud. It's standing firm when it matters most. It's what stays after the shouting stops. And it would stay here, long after she was gone.